The Return of Sherlock Holmes, 1905, Episode 8, The Adventure of the Six Napoleons. Welcome back, fellow detectives. After the moral darkness of the Milverton case, you might be ready for something a bit more puzzling and less morally ambiguous. Today's mystery takes us into the world of bizarre criminal behavior that seems to make absolutely no sense. Until suddenly, it makes perfect sense. Have you ever wondered why someone would break into houses just to smash plaster statues? What could drive a person to commit multiple burglaries with no apparent motive beyond destruction? Prepare yourself for one of Holmes's most intellectually satisfying cases, a mystery where the pattern itself is the key to understanding everything. Picture yourself at Baker Street on a warm June morning in 1900. You're reading the newspaper with Holmes and Watson when Inspector Lestrade arrives, looking thoroughly perplexed. "Mr. Holmes," he begins without preamble, "I need your help with the strangest case I've encountered in 20 years with the Yard. We have a criminal who's committing burglaries across London, but he's not stealing anything valuable. He's only destroying plaster busts of Napoleon Bonaparte." Holmes lowers his newspaper with immediate interest. "Busts of Napoleon? How many have been destroyed?" Lestrade consults his notebook. 4 so far, all in the past 2 weeks. Each time, the perpetrator breaks into a house or shop, locates a plaster bust of Napoleon, smashes it to pieces, and leaves without taking anything else, even when there's money or jewelry in plain sight. Think about this peculiar pattern, detective. What kind of thief ignores valuable items to destroy worthless plaster statues? What could possibly motivate such bizarre behavior? Is this the work of a madman, or is there method hidden within the apparent madness? "Fascinating," Holmes murmurs, his eyes lighting up with that familiar gleam. "Tell me about each incident in detail, Inspector. I suspect there's a logic underlying this seemingly irrational behavior." Watson looks skeptical. Surely this is just vandalism by someone with a grudge against Napoleon, perhaps a fervent British patriot who hates the French? But Holmes shakes his head. "If that were true, Watson, our vandal would target expensive bronze or marble busts in museums or wealthy homes. Why focus exclusively on cheap plaster reproductions? And why this sudden spree after Napoleon has been dead for 80 years? No, there's something more specific driving these actions." Lestrade describes the incidents. The first bust was destroyed at Morse Hudson's shop on Kennington Road, a plaster dealer who makes and sells these reproductions. The burglar smashed it right in the shop window, making no attempt at stealth. The second was at Dr. Barnicott's house in Kennington. He had 2 identical Napoleon busts, and the thief broke in and destroyed both of them. 2 busts in the same house? Holmes leans forward with sharp attention. Were they both smashed on the premises? Lestrade shakes his head. "That's one of the odd details. The thief smashed one in Dr. Barnicott's study but carried the second one outside and smashed it on his doorstep, as if he wanted better light to examine the pieces." "Interesting," Holmes says softly. "What about the 4th incident?" Lestrade continues. "Yesterday morning, a man named Harker in Pitt Street, Kensington, had his Napoleon bust stolen from his front hall. The thief didn't smash it on the premises. Instead, he carried it 400 yards down the street before destroying it in someone's front garden." Holmes steeples his fingers, clearly formulating a theory. "And were all these busts from the same source? The same manufacturer or shop?" Lestrade checks his notes. "We traced them back. All 4 busts came from the same batch made by Gelder and Cody, the plaster works in Stepney. They were sold through Morse Hudson's shop about a year ago." "Excellent!" Holmes springs to his feet. "Inspector, I believe I understand what's happening. Your burglar isn't a vandal at all. He's a searcher. He's looking for something specific, something small enough to be hidden inside a plaster bust, and he's systematically working through every bust from that particular batch." Watson's eyes widen. "Something hidden inside the plaster, like a treasure?" Holmes nods. "Precisely. Someone concealed an object of great value inside one of these busts during manufacturing, and now they're desperately trying to recover it. The question is, what's valuable enough to justify this risky search, and which bust contains it? Think carefully about this theory, detective. If you were searching for something hidden in one of 6 identical busts scattered across London, how would you go about it? breaking into houses one by one, smashing each bust until you found the right one. Exactly what our criminal is doing. How many busts were in the original batch? Holmes asks urgently. Lestrade consults with Morse Hudson and reports back. 6 busts total were made from that particular mold and sold last year. 4 have been destroyed, which means 2 remain somewhere in London. Holmes's expression becomes intense. Then our criminal will strike again, and soon. He's come too far to give up now. Inspector, I need a list of everyone who purchased busts from that batch. We must identify and warn the owners of the remaining 2 busts before the thief reaches them. The investigation reveals that the 6th and final bust from the batch was sold to a Mr. Josiah Brown of Chiswick. Holmes and Lestrade arrange a stakeout at Brown's house that very night, certain the burglar will attempt to steal this last Napoleon bust. They position themselves in the shadows near the house, waiting in the darkness. Hours pass with no activity. Then, near midnight, a figure appears, a tall, athletic man moving with careful stealth toward Brown's front door. He picks the lock with practiced skill and enters the house. Now? Lestrade whispers, ready to spring the trap. But Holmes restrains him. Not yet. Let him take the bust and leave the house. I want to see where he takes it and watch what he does. They wait in agonizing suspense as the burglar emerges carrying the plaster Napoleon bust under his arm. The man walks quickly down the street, constantly checking behind him for pursuit. After several blocks, he stops under a street lamp, sets down the bust, and smashes it with a heavy stick. The plaster shatters into pieces, and the burglar immediately begins sorting through the fragments, searching desperately. Now! Holmes shouts, and they rush forward. The burglar tries to flee, but Lestrade and 2 constables tackle him to the ground. As they wrestle him into handcuffs, Holmes kneels beside the shattered bust, examining the pieces by lamplight. Well, well, Holmes says softly, picking up a small object from among the plaster fragments. What have we here? He holds it up to the light, a black pearl the size of a large pea, gleaming with an oily luster that speaks of immense value. Gentlemen, may I present the missing black pearl of the Borgias worth at least £20,000 and lost for over 2 years? The captured burglar stares at the pearl with an expression of mingled relief and despair. 2 years I've searched for it, he gasps. 2 years of planning, risking everything, smashing those damned busts one by one. And now, when I finally found it, you were waiting. Holmes and Lestrade take the prisoner, who identifies himself as Beppo, an Italian craftsman, back to Scotland Yard for questioning. Under interrogation, the full story emerges like a tragic opera. I worked at Gelder & Co. 2 years ago, Beppo explains, his accent thick with emotion. I was a skilled plaster craftsman, one of their best workers. One day my cousin Pietro Vannucci came to me with an incredible proposition. He had stolen the famous black pearl of the Borgias from the collection of the Princess of Colonna. Think about the audacity of this theft, detective. The black pearl of the Borgias is one of the most famous jewels in Europe, supposedly cursed and certainly worth a fortune. Stealing it would instantly make the thief one of the most wanted criminals in Italy. Pietro was being pursued by the police, Beppo continues. He needed to hide the pearl immediately, so he brought it to me at the plaster works. We were making a batch of 6 Napoleon busts that day. Identical molds, identical plaster. I hid the pearl inside one of the busts before it dried, planning to extract it later when the pursuit cooled down. But something went wrong, Holmes prompts. Beppo nods miserably. That very day I got into a fight with another worker. The police were called and I was arrested for assault. While I was in prison for a year, the 6 busts were sold through Morse Hudson's shop. When I was released, I had no idea which bust contained the pearl, or who had purchased them. So you began your systematic search, Watson says, understanding dawning. You traced each bust to its purchaser and destroyed them one by one until you found the right one. Beppo's voice rises with frustration. Do you know how difficult it is to track plaster busts sold over a year ago? I worked at Morse Hudson's shop to gain access to his records. I followed every lead, broke into every house, and I was so close. This was the last bust, the 6th one. The pearl was finally in my hands. Holmes regards him with something approaching sympathy. A clever plan, actually. Hiding the pearl in wet plaster was inspired. No one would think to look there, and the pearl would be perfectly preserved. Your mistake was in getting arrested before you could retrieve it, leaving you with no choice but this dangerous search. What about Pietro Vannucci? Lestrade asks. Where is Beppo's cousin now? Beppo's face darkens. Dead. He was killed in a knife fight 6 months ago, never knowing where the pearl was hidden. I'm the only one left who knew the secret. The case concludes with Beppo's conviction for multiple burglaries. The black pearl of the Borgias is returned to the Princess of Colonna, who offers a substantial reward that's divided between the police and the various victims whose homes were burgled. Josiah Brown, owner of the final bust, receives the largest share since the pearl was technically found in his property. Back at Baker Street, Holmes reflects on the case with evident satisfaction. An excellent exercise in logical deduction, Watson. Once you identified the pattern, that only busts from a specific batch were being targeted, the explanation became clear. Something valuable must be hidden in one of them. But how did you know it was in the last bust? You ask. Holmes smiles. I didn't know with certainty. But the burglar's increasing desperation suggested he'd already searched most of them without success. The law of probability indicated the pearl must be in one of the remaining busts, and Beppo's behavior confirmed it. Watson pours brandy for all three. What strikes me is the sheer bad luck involved. If Beppo hadn't gotten into that fight, if he'd been able to recover the pearl immediately, the entire scheme would have worked perfectly. Holmes nods. Crime is often undone by chance as much as by detection. Beppo's plan was actually quite brilliant, using his workplace and skills to create a perfect hiding place. But one impulsive fight destroyed years of potential security. What I find interesting, Holmes continues, is the psychology of it. Beppo spent 2 years obsessing over that pearl, building it up in his mind as his salvation, his fortune, his escape from poverty. The pearl became more valuable to him than his freedom, his safety, or his conscience. He committed 6 burglaries, risked arrest multiple times, all for a jewel he'd never actually possessed. Think about this obsession, detective. Beppo destroyed his life chasing something that was never truly his. The pearl was stolen property from the beginning, and even if he'd successfully recovered it, he could never have sold it openly without attracting attention. His grand scheme was doomed from the start. The busts themselves are symbolic, Holmes muses, warming to his analysis. Napoleon busts, representations of a man who conquered Europe but ultimately fell from power. Beppo, like Napoleon, overreached. He aimed too high, grasped for too much, and his ambition destroyed him. Rather philosophical for a case about smashed statues, Watson observes with a smile. But Holmes is serious. Every case teaches us something about human nature, Watson. This one teaches us about obsession, about how a single goal can consume a person until they lose all perspective. Beppo couldn't walk away from the pearl, couldn't accept his loss. He had to keep searching, keep trying, until inevitably he was caught. Lestrade, reading the newspapers the next day, shares an amusing footnote. The press is having great fun with this case. They're calling it The Adventure of the Napoleonic Vandal, and writing that Beppo was symbolically destroying representations of tyranny. They've completely missed the actual motive. Holmes laughs. Let them have their romantic theories. The truth, a desperate criminal smashing plaster busts to find a hidden pearl, is far more prosaic, but infinitely more interesting to those who appreciate logical deduction. What about the remaining 2 busts, you ask? The 5th one that Beppo hadn't found yet? Holmes checks his notes. Ah, yes. That one was purchased by a Mrs. Anderson in Brixton. I've informed her of the situation. She's decided to keep her Napoleon bust intact as a conversation piece. After all, it's now famous as one of the 6 that drove a man to crime. So tell me, detective, did you guess why the busts were being destroyed before Holmes explained? Could you see the logic in the pattern of seemingly senseless vandalism? And what does this case teach us about how obsession can drive people to increasingly desperate and irrational behavior? This intellectually satisfying mystery reminds us that even the strangest criminal behavior usually has a logical explanation. What appears to be madness, destroying plaster statues while ignoring valuable items, becomes perfectly sensible once you understand the hidden motive. The key to solving such cases is recognizing that the pattern itself is the clue. It also demonstrates Holmes's particular genius. Where others saw only random vandalism, he perceived systematic searching. Where others focused on what was destroyed, he asked why those specific items were targeted. By thinking differently from conventional investigators, he solved a case that had baffled Scotland Yard completely. Join me next time as we investigate The Adventure of the Three Students, where Holmes must solve a case of academic dishonesty at a prestigious university, proving that even in the hallowed halls of learning, human weakness and temptation can lead to betrayal.